of a Kawasaki Voyager 12. It's not really one of the hardest things to do, but it still intimidates some people. A few, things that can get you if you're not careful, but not beyond the realm of most guys or gals. Kind of like knocking the camera over. Anyways, to start off with, this is what you're going to need to do if you want to take the windshield off, or switch the windshield, or take the windshield off in preparation for taking, the lower fairings off or the upper fairings off, in order to get to all the stuff inside. Like if you wanted to adjust the cruise control cable, or install a CB, or change some speakers out, or stuff like that. Basic tools that you're going to need. You're going to need a number 3 Phillips, which is usually a larger Phillips. A number 2 Phillips, which is a standard Phillips. The screws that hold the mirrors on are take a number 3. Don't try and use the smaller number 2 in those screws. What happens is this is one of the screws from elsewhere on the bike. This takes a number 3. If you were to use the number 2, the smaller screwdriver, see how it wiggles around in there. If you try to use this, and these can be tight if they've never been taken off. If you try to use the smaller screwdriver in the number 3 screw, you can waller that out, and it can be difficult to remove the screws. If you use the proper screwdriver, the proper tool for the job, see how nice and tight those fit in there. If you don't have a number 3, go to the hardware store and get you one. They're not that expensive. They're like $8, $6, depending on where you go, Lowe's or Home Depot or something like that, or Sears. You'll also need either a 12mm wrench, or a 12mm socket, or if you have a real small crescent wrench, that would probably work also. To start off with, like I said, these screws are normally a number 3. This bike, the screws were buggered up, and stainless is so much nicer looking, so I replaced them with Allen screws. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove those first. These screws attach to the framework that holds the fairing up, or the framework that the fairing attaches to, that attaches to the main frame. It's not a real rugged piece, but it gets the job done. All it has to do is hold that fairing in place. 2 screws. There is usually a gasket behind there. If the mirrors have never been off the vehicle, they can stick to the plastic chrome. You can just peel that off and stick it back on the mirror that it came off of, and then set that off to the side. I suppose maybe you want to see both sides being done. Just to show you, when you pull, because I've replaced these with different screws, they're a little longer, but that's basically all right there. That's all that screws into the framework. The stock screws, I think, are a little bit, I can't remember. At any rate, so like this one, if you would take a little bit longer, which would be the inside, or this one closest to the center on both sides, would take a bit longer to unscrew. Underneath the mirror, there is usually a Phillips screw. This bike has had, I think, both of them replaced at some point. So the screws that are, if your bike's never been messed around with, you know, your screws may look a little different than this, but they are a Phillips. There is usually, I think, a washer underneath them. I can't recall. There's so many of these bikes out there that people have taken the stuff off and they forget how it goes back together. They lose a screw, whatever, and you're lucky that they even put stuff back in it. Whenever I've got a bike apart, whether it's mine or somebody else's, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine to make sure that all the hardware's back on there. These screws aren't real structural. All they do is help center this piece here. You can see how those kind of have to be lined up. These holes are pretty big, where the shoulder that's molded in the back of the mirror sits in, but they do have to be kind of centered for everything to line up right. And all these screws do is hold this end down a little bit, long enough for you to get the mirror screws back on. And so I'm going to take the one off the other side. I'm not going to turn the camera because it's just a screw, nothing to get excited about, seeing that quick it's done. Then this chrome piece, if your bike is sweet and factory looking, there might be a little rubber triangle right here in this spot in the corner that kind of plugs the hole where the cowling by the speakers, the speaker grill, the chrome piece, and the windshield all meet. There's a hole small enough or big enough that I could get my pinky in there. From the factory, they put these little rubber triangle wedges that kind of just clip onto the side. They usually disappear the first 6 months that the guys own the bike. If your bike has those, you can just pull those off. All now is this chrome cover. It also has the rubber gasket on the front of the windshield. But see how that came loose? Right here in the center, behind the Kawasaki badge, there are two little posts that stick up from the upper fairing that are molded in. And there's two grommets, two rubber grommets that are snapped in to this chrome piece, and that comes down on the post and snaps on and helps keep this in place. What you want to do is kind of lift up back here and then move your fingers around, and then if you want, you just push it up with your thumbs and it comes loose. It's that easy. If you have a stock windshield, it comes in a little bit up top, and so you could probably just pull it forward. This is an aftermarket windshield, was just a hair bigger. This chrome piece on the edges wraps around just a hair on the back side. You can see it when you sit down on the bike. This face right here wraps around, and so you want to, in order to get this off, you just have to spread it apart just a little bit or lift up far enough for it to clear the windshield. On the back side, you see the rubber grommets right here, and then over here you can see one post and you can see the other post. There's one and there's the other right there, and those little posts snap into the rubber grommets. This rubber deal comes off real easy. There we go. Comes off real easy. Just keep it pushed on there and keep it all together, and it probably won't come apart on you. Now, then, inside that chrome piece, you've got the holes or the mounts where the mirror screws go through. You've got the spot where the screw that held on the chrome piece screws into. On that, there's a rubber, should be, unless somebody's been in it, there's a little rubber booty, if you will, or a rubber cup or rubber cap. All that does is help keep that chrome piece, one, from moving a little bit, and two, from squeaking. You know, the plastic on a metal part, you know, can wear and cause noises and rattles and stuff like that. So they put these little deals on there kind of as a dampener. And also the rubbery part of it helps as like a spring that pushes against that screw and keeps that screw from backing out underneath the mirror. What that covers up is a stud or a bolt, a giant bolt with a hole down through the center of it. That's a 12 millimeter. Your 12 millimeter wrench would fit on that. Over here, right in the center, behind the Kawasaki badge, are two of those big number 3 screws. I'm going to try and move this in so that you can get a good idea of what I'm talking about with the screw issue with the different sizes. If I stick this in there, this is the number 2 screwdriver in a number 3 hole. You see how much that moves? This has had somebody working on it that used the wrong screwdriver, so it's wallered out even more than normal. Whereas if you took the number 3 screwdriver, stuck it in there, it still fits tight. So use the right screwdriver, use the right tool for the job. Let me move the camera back. I'm going to show you a deal spot. There's a hole right there. Back this out of here. So you've got the 2 right behind the Kawasaki badge, which are number 3 screws, which are kind of really the main screws that hold the main hardware that holds the windshield on. Those are what keeps the windshield from sliding back or tilting back. Your adjustment's about 2 inches in this, where it's got the slot where you can move it up and down just a hair. We'll come back to that, and then over here again, it was where this 12 millimeter stud is. This is the secondary, if you will, set of hardware that does the most work as far as retaining the windshield to the bike. This middle screw, or this middle hole right here, from the factory, there's a plastic push nut or a plastic well nut or a plastic insert nut that comes in from the back side of the fairing. It's a flange nut or a flanged insert that's kind of got a washer on it, so when it pushes up against the inside of the fairing, it can't be pulled through. It's just a piece of plastic. The screws that they use are machine screws with a washer, and all they do is sort of help hold this in, or kind of sort of like a rattle. But really, the first time, it doesn't take, like kindergartner, if you told them to tighten it up, that's all it would take for it to strip out. After a while, after years, they can become brittle, and what will happen is when you go to tighten that screw up, the little thin flange on the back side that keeps that nut from being pulled through breaks off, and you pull it through. It's not real important. The majority of the bikes out there, the screws are gone or the inserts are broken. It's not that big of a deal, because these 2 here in the center and this stud on both sides are the main thing, is what holds the windshield to the bike. It's not really worth the time and the effort and the trouble to replace those, because they're just going to break down the road, because it is, again, a machine screw screwing into plastic. So in order to finish this, what I like to do is loosen, this is where the 12 millimeter wrench comes in, is loosen that up a little bit. You can leave the nuts or the studs in there, or you can pull them all the way out. If you pull them all the way out, which I will go ahead and do so that you can see what they look like. This is all it is. It's just a weird looking bolt that is threaded on the top end for that one screw, and then like a flange washer or a shouldered spacer. What that does is that spreads the load on the windshield. Keep those together. What you have to be careful, and I'll try and show you when it goes back together, if you pull this out, this shoulder, when you go to line stuff back up, especially if you take the fairing off and put it back on, the hole or the space where that fits in, this shoulder here has to fit inside the hole in the fairing, kind of like it has to fit in the slot in the windshield. And so if stuff isn't lined up right, when you tighten, here, let's see if we can do it this way. Yeah. So imagine this is the hole or the slot that shoulder has to fit into. So it would end up like that. The problem is if you take this all the way out and then you go moving the fairing around, and then the hole for the screw itself, when you tighten this up, the shoulder may hit the plastic, and when you go to tighten this down, it may take a chunk out of the plastic. So you have to kind of watch. As soon as you get this started in the fairing or into the fairing mount, what I do is I go ahead and shove this down to get everything lined up before I go cranking on that and tearing something up that's a lot of money to fix. It won't really hurt much, but if it takes a chunk out of the plastic, not taking a chunk out of the plastic is preferable to taking a chunk out of the plastic, right? So anyway, so that's what you just want to watch that if you pull that all the way out. Even if you don't pull it all the way out and you just back this out of here, it can still shift on you as soon as you unscrew this far enough for that shoulder to clear the plastic. And that's just something you want to watch out for when you put it all back together. But I'll show you that here in a bit. Possibly, if I go that far as finishing the whole job and putting it back together. You also then, these right here in the center, what I like to do is I like to loosen those up. Don't take them all the way out, because with these out or loose, especially if you take them all the way out, every video I do, I'm going to try and drop something on the floor. Loosen those screws up in the center with the right tool. And then this, you see how that, maybe you can't. See how that can slide up? And really, it gives you about 1.5 inches. I said 2 inches earlier, barely 2 inches. Any more than that, you risk strength issues by clamping onto just the bottom of this. But with these loose, you can slide this all the way up and remove it. And then you can, like I said, if you were replacing a windshield, that's as far as you would need to go. This is the weather strip that is on the cowling. When you set the new, we'll try and cover that here in a bit. We got the fairings all back on. Now it's time to put the windshield back on. We still have all of our hardware that we talked about. The middle screws right above the nose with the shoulder spacer that use a number 3 Phillips screwdriver. The little rubber booties that go on top of the stud with its shoulder. And then we had a screw and a washer that were on the chrome piece underneath the mirror. We talked about making sure that the hole for these shoulders is lined up, that the fairing is lined up with the hole. If you look down in there, see right now, the screw portion, the threaded portion of this stud will screw in there just fine. But when this shoulder comes forward, it will hit the fairing and it'll actually try and take a bite and chew and shave a part of that fairing off. So what you want to do is, as you're installing that screw back in there, you kind of want to push the fairing up so that the hole and everything is more centered, and that way you see how this one is not perfectly round anymore. That's because people, when they've taken this fairing on and off, it wasn't centered, and that shoulder, as it's tightened up and goes in, it chews off a portion of that fairing. One thing also, most of the stock windshields out by the mirrors, they are not slotted here. This is where those bosses stick out, where the mirror mounts, the mirror screws go through. So that studded piece I mentioned earlier, when we took it apart, you know, you can loosen those up. You probably will have to take them all the way out if it's got a stock windshield on it, because they, with just the hole in it, with no slot, the windshield is held in with the boss sticking through it. And so in order for you to be able to pull the windshield out, the windshield has to come forward off of the boss and then off. And so in order to do that, you'd have to take that stud, this one right here, all the way out in order to lift the corner of the windshield off. If you've got a Clearview or one of the other aftermarkets, most of those are slotted, and so you can just leave those in there like we discussed, and then this will just slide off. First thing to start with would be those big center screws. And just like I showed you on the outside, the hole isn't lined up perfectly. So what we'll do is we'll just start the screw, and then we will push the fairing over. There you go, just like that, so that that shoulder can go in and out without chewing up the fairing. But it still has to be out far enough to slide the windshield down in there. So we'll take the other screw, we'll do the same thing with it. Start the screw, make sure that shoulder is in the hole but is loose. And we'll do the same thing with the ones on the outside. Since we have the windshield, an aftermarket windshield with the slots. And then the one over here. And the shoulder is nice and loose, but it's still in the hole for the fairing. Now, because we're going to put the windshield on, the stuff that we were using this as a shelf, we can't do that anymore, so we'll put these right where we know where they're at. Along with the broken piece for this particular windshield. And then starting from the center, push the fairing back, let it slide down in there. But you got to make sure the corners do the same thing. Now if you leave these off, cool. It's probably a little bit easier than trying to fish all four of them at the same time. Just do the center ones. Once you get this one, you know, loose in there, then you can go ahead and screw the outside ones in. This windshield for this bike, because this is adjustable, the farther down it is, the stronger the bond, or the stronger the mount for these screws. Plus the guy that rides this particular bike likes the windshield up a little bit more instead of laying back. So once it's down, tighten the center ones first. Now they're nice and snug. Just a little bit more. If you go too far, I mean really you can't even, once they're snug or fairly tight, you really can't go more than about a quarter turn before you've reached the limit. And if you go any farther than that, you'll crack the windshield. Not the end of the world, but it does happen. The ones out here on the end that we used are 12mm for. Kind of pull that down so that that's all the way up in there. Same deal, snug it up but not too far. This windshield has a chip broken out of it over here on the right side. I always like to put those back in so that the full, or as much of that shoulder is supported. That way it doesn't bend the stud. As you're tightening it up. And again, just snug that up. The rubber booties, the vibration dealies, rattle clips, whatever you want to. And then our chrome piece. Remember our grommets underneath. Hook the corners over here. If it's up top, the windshield narrows in, and so it's a little easier to get at it. So put it on and then just pull it straight down. And then right here in the center, you can look from underneath to see if you're getting close. But then right here in the center, what I do is just press it down, straight down. That's about all you can hope for. And then back over here, we had those screws that went through the chrome piece into the rubber booty into that stud. More than likely you'll have to push that way down in order to get that lined up. Same for the other side. And if these are missing, it's not the end of the world. That the hole can get wallered out, and because there's a recess that screw head fits into underneath the mirror mount, which I will show you here. Right there, and it's just hollow behind it, so you could probably get away with a fairly large screw, but it's not going to be too big before it starts to interfere with this back edge. And so if those screws are missing, it's not the end of the world. It is nice to have them, but that's, you know, somebody being really, really particular sometimes. So the chrome piece is on. We got a pretty good fit, or at least the same fit that we had when we took it off. This bike is in pretty decent shape. I've seen some that fit better, I've seen some that fit a whole lot worse. And sometimes those little posts are actually broken, so there's really not a whole lot that you can do. But like I said, if you're missing those screws over here on the corners, it's not the fret, because that holds everything on, ultimately. So you would take your number 3 screwdriver on a stock bike, and remember this one had stainless Allens. Snug those up. And you don't have to go too tight with them. These are plastic mounts, so they won't take a whole lot of abuse. You can pull the screw head or squish. I told you every video we're going to drop something. You can tighten that up enough to where it destroys the shoulder, the mount for for the mirror, where it pulls that screw all the way through. And then you have to come up with something to fix it, or you have to replace the mirror. Just like that. The only thing left to do is sometimes, and we'll take this off, and grab a flashlight, because we'll need to double check it. When you're done with getting the windshield back on, as it would appear that we are, the gasket on the back side sometimes can get bound up. You can see there's like one little bitty spot on this one. What you can do, what I have heard of some guys doing, is they'll lay a piece of string in that channel, and then after they're all done, they will pull the string, and what it'll do is it'll flip that lip up all the way around. I use a curved screwdriver, or a modified real thin screwdriver, and I'll stick it in the lip, and I'll just run it around just like that if there's any spots. That's it. Thanks.